is actually an introduction to a series of sermons that we will be covering, and we'll be exploring this much further in our church meeting about what is church for. It's not a bad question. What is church for? What is its purpose? If you ask people around this world what they think, well, they come up with all sorts of ideas. It's a historical thing. It's a cultural relic. It doesn't belong in the 21st century. Many people will tell you that. Church attendance alone indicates that many people have given up on church and have abandoned it because they see no point in it. And it's a good question, if I might ask you, why are you here this morning? I'm not going to ask you to put your hand up and answer. But there are all sorts of reasons that bring people to church. But people would accuse the church of all sorts of things. People, certainly in my country, would accuse it of being the initiation of wars and battles and strife amongst people. It causes division, they would claim. Or an anachronism. It's irrelevant to the modern world. I wonder if you know who said this. That the church is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. Anyone know? You'll get it when I say the next line. It is the opium of the people. Karl Marx, the inventor of communism. And his accusation is that it is man-made. Men and women made it up somehow because they had need of a crutch, an opiate, something that would dull their senses. Now, I believe what Peter has got and what has been read to us is going to really challenge those views and destroy them. Because it is important to know what the Bible says church is for, and then think in our own hearts why we come and why we feel we are part of it. And that's what we'll be exploring over the next few weeks in a series that we're going to cover. But what do Christians think of church? How do Christians behave in regard to church? Maybe that will give us a clue as to what church is for. And I'm not sure it does. Many people regard church as a cultural teddy bear. They've grown up with it. It's nice, soft, cuddly. They've always been there, and they've always gone to it. Other people think, well, my family, do you know the number of churches I've gone to and preached in? And actually, they're all about the same, they're all connected to the same family. They all have the same family name, and they might say, well, it's in the blood. Is that sufficient reason for church? Others think it's a clique, a club that you join with membership rules and all the sort of things. It was what we've always done around here. I've got into the habit, so that's why I go to. Is that not the purpose of church, to meet people? And other Christians will even regard it as a hobby. And I think there's many that do. They come and go when it suits. When I grew up and was at church, I was scolded if I didn't appear twice on a Sunday and also do the Sunday school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And the Baptist Union of Great Britain now views the church attendance that if you go once a month, you're a regular attender. That is how different our society is today. And that is what people think of it. We do it as a hobby. On my CV, I've got, well, I'm a member of this organization and that, and I do a bit of golf, and I play bowls, and I'm in church, and I'm one of the deacons, or, I'm a Sunday school leader in church, and it looks nice on our CV. Is that the purpose of church? To make you and me look good on our CV? Now, the man, Peter, who wrote the epistle that we've just heard read out, knew a thing or two about church. Jesus called him up and called the disciples together. And he said these words to the disciples one day. And you'll find them in Matthew chapter 16. And starting at verse 13. Jesus said, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Well, some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." "Hey, but what about you? Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. I tell you, you are Peter." His name is in Greek Petros, which means a pebble or a stone. "And on this rock," in Greek Petra, or a mighty rock or edifice. I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. I give you the keys of the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. That's quite a challenging thought. That's the first reference to the church in the New Testament, in fact, in the Bible. What is church if it's so important that God would send his only son, Jesus, to die on the cross for it and be something and create the church and then leave this world in the hands of the church to continue his mission? Jesus makes quite clear three things about it in this passage, and it is important to understand it. The huge rock that Jesus was saying, that Peter had expressed, on which he would build his church, is the statement that Jesus is the Messiah. There isn't any other. It's not that Peter was going to be the first pope and all that, which unfortunately our Roman Catholic friends have got carried away with. That's a false interpretation. The truth is that Jesus was going to build his church on the rock of himself. He is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And on that solid foundation, the church indeed can be built. And the second thing he says about it, on this rock I will build my church, but the gates of hell will not overcome it. In other words, it is going to destroy the devil's kingdom. Now, if I ask you what the purpose of the church is and tell you it's there to destroy the devil and his kingdom, you might sit up a bit and think, oh, hang on, I'm a member of that organization. Have I got it right? And then thirdly, Jesus said, not only that, it would bring the gospel new life to people. It'd be the key that would unlock other broken hearts, that they might open up to Jesus and that they might be saved as we are. How wonderful. We are God's keys that open salvation to the rest of this world. Shut your mouth and don't talk to them. The door remains locked. Open your mouth and share your testimony with them and the gospel about Jesus and what he can do for them. And the doors are wide open. And men and women, boys and girls, come to Jesus. And we expand and grow in this world. So the church is actually an ark. Now, some of you have watched the film Schindler's List. The author of that book actually called it Schindler's Ark, where a group of Jewish people in Poland, in Warsaw area, were extracted through the oversight of Oskar Schindler, who took them out and managed to look after them in a very protective way through Auschwitz and through some horrible experiences, and take them out of Germany, out of Auschwitz, and into Israel eventually. They all went. And the descendants of that crowd of about 400 people became tens of thousands today. The church is that. It is an ark that is there to rescue people. Somebody said, I do not wish to live within the sound of church or chapel bell. I want to run a rescue shop within a yard of hell. That is what the church is all about. And I think we've lost sight of that. And perhaps we here in Amesbury have a lot to learn still on this matter. So how did Peter pass it on? I'm going to show a slide that I showed before a few months ago that shows Peter's thinking. It is expressed in this epistle, this letter. And I'll show you the structure of the letter that will help you see it. But if you go back to Peter's letter, you could follow it if you want in your Bibles. 1 Peter chapter 2. There are 4 stages, there are 4 aspects. But if I put the first slide up, Peter compares the church to a building. He says that we are part of it. We're a spiritual house, he says, in chapter 2 and verse 5 of 1 Peter. And he says that we are living stones in it. And you can see the format. And he says, I lay in Zion a precious cornerstone or capstone, which is Jesus, who is the top. So the church is compared to a building of which we are bricks within it. And the purpose of this building is it continues to grow. The architect has not finished his plans. They haven't been completed yet. We have much to do to complete this building, and we are part of it. But if you take this same model, Peter then explains that the Christian life isn't just about broadening sideways and bringing more and more in. Yes, it is about that. But it's also about going and growing and going up vertically. Now let me follow this through in the next slide. In chapter 2 and verse 2, Peter says to the church, "You are like newborn babies. Crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation." Have you ever thought that your salvation is not a static, dead thing? It is a living thing that each day you should have progressed from where you were yesterday. It's growing. It's going up. We get spiritual milk and we grow through it just like a little baby. So we start being brought into the church by being born again. And so we get into the fellowship through new birth of Christ. But then we must grow, because if you look at the previous chapter, Peter refers to people in the church in verse 14 of chapter 1 as obedient children. They've grown up from being an infant. They're now children. Next bit, you see? And so, as obedient children, we don't conform to the world outside, but we let Christ transform us within. And he says, be holy. Now, that is the direction of travel we need to take. There's a big biblical word for it called sanctification, the theologians call it, but it means getting more and more like Jesus every day. Is that a process that's happening in your life? Or is yesterday just the same as today? You're saved, satisfied, and stuck, but you're not growing. So you grow vertically as well. But then thirdly, just a few verses down, in chapter 2 and verse 11, the version that you've heard read this morning describes us as aliens and exiles, but the authorized version has a lovely phrase for this. He says, "Dear friends, I urge you as strangers and pilgrims." That gets you're aliens, yes. We recognize this world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. My treasure's laid up somewhere beyond the blue. My Savior beckons me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. We grow and we realize we're actually pilgrims on a journey. We are making our progress. Now, some pilgrims seem to be stuck back about point 1 or 2 and not making much progress. But that is what Peter expects of the church, to grow and make progress. And then lastly, in his last chapter, Peter then in chapter 5 and verse 2 refers to those who are elders, those who are mature, and he asks them to be shepherds of God's flock. And the word shepherd in Latin is pastor, which obviously we know about. Now, if you take this growth that is expected of the church and how Peter lays it out, and then superimpose it with a different approach, you'll see where everything starts to come together. And the way I'll put it is this. So what did Jesus do to build his church? Jesus said in the passage I've just read, "You're Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." You've heard me say many times from this pulpit that this church isn't yours or mine. It's Christ's church. And secondly, he is the builder that continues to build it up. If you're out of sync with Christ, you're not being built up. So if we just move through this, we can ask ourselves, what did Jesus do to form the church? How did he go about it? Where did he start? Now, I can see this face is staring back at me, and I think you're getting bored, and I think it's time you helped me in my sermon. So reach forward, grab that Bible that's in front of you, please, because I'm going to ask you to look up certain references, and then I'm going to ask you to read them out. If you've courage, stand up, and in a good loud voice, read it out. If you haven't, please read it out loud enough so everyone can hear. But let's look through 5 references in the Bible of what Jesus did to build his church. And let's see where we come to. John chapter 1, verse 11. Someone read that one out first, please, for me. Go on to the next verse. Is that verse 11 or is that verse 10? I think that's verse 9, actually. You're at 11, please. Who were his own people here that it's talking about? Israel, the Jews. Jesus came to his own people, the Jews. If I could press the first click on this one, please. That was the community into which Jesus was born, the Jewish people. Jesus said, I came not to preach to the Gentiles, but to the house of Israel. He came to his own community. What did his own community do? It says here, his own people did not accept him. But you start your church by coming to your own community. Jesus did that. Next one we look at is Matthew, and the next two are in Matthew, so that would be helpful. It's chapter 5, it's the Sermon on the Mount, and it's just the first verse, and if you can drift over into the second verse, that would help. So Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, please. Anyone like to? Thank you very much, Bob. Fine, yes, thanks. Okay. So Jesus saw the crowd. He performed miracles, and of course, people were fascinated. And from that community, a crowd drew around him. Many, many thousands. He went on to feed that crowd, and it says how many people were there. How many people were at that event, by the way? He fed? Wrong. 5,000 men were at that event. There were probably 20,000. And he fed the whole lot of them. And so, of course, he drew in crowds. Next click, please, to show, yes, you've done it, thank you. So, people moved from being in the community to joining, and out of curiosity, finding out, what's this all about? They joined the crowd. Then go to Matthew chapter 16 and verse 24, and if you'd like to read that out, please. If you want to become my followers. From that crowd, Jesus called people out to follow him. When he came across a couple of fishermen by the beach, he said, follow me. I will make you fishers of mankind. And so we find that moving from the crowd, he gathered a congregation. Thank you. And the congregation were those who claimed to be Jesus' followers. And they were those who were more than curious. They accepted and believed what he said. How well, we don't know, because that congregation went up and down, and sometimes they left him. But then thirdly, Jesus moved on from that. And someone like to read for me, please, Luke chapter 14 and verse 26. And if you want to get to the next one, it's Mark chapter 3 and verse 14 that will be coming next. But Luke 14 and verse 26 says this. I think that's one of the most challenging verses in the whole of the Bible. Whoever comes to me and does not, listen to these words, does not hate father, mother, wife, children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Now this verse, Jesus isn't calling us to go out and murder our family or commit suicide, even life itself. Jesus is saying this quite bluntly. If the love you have for those closest to you and dearest, and even for your own life, is not exceeded by the love you have for me, you cannot be my disciple. Get your priorities right, Jesus is saying. If you're clinging on to things in this life that are temporary, and you're not grasping the one who is eternal, you cannot be my disciple. A disciple is from the Latin discipula, which means a student or a pupil at a school. And a disciple is one who is disciplined in the ways of Christ. A disciple shows, next click, commitment to Jesus beyond what many in the congregation might be doing. But it's a challenge, because every one of us is called to mature into discipleship. We're not saved, satisfied, and stuck, as I said. We're growing vertically. We're growing up. Are you growing? Have you committed your life to Jesus in such a way that you are actually his disciple? And when he says, yes, you do it. When he says, go there, you go. When he says, love, you love them. That is the challenge that Jesus sets before us. But that is church. That is us. And if we're not there, we're not his properly. So that's that. But there's slightly more. Mark chapter 3 and verse 14. It's all right, we're getting near the end. You're okay. We're nearly done. So just to give you the flavor, because we'll be covering these topics in the next 6 or 7 weeks so that you'll get more depth out of them. But I just want to, as it were, get the framework for you. Mark chapter 3, verse 14. Someone read it out, please. There was at the heart of his team, at the pinnacle, in a sense, of his work, a core of 12. It was actually 11, as we discover later. And he called them to be with him so that he might coach them intimately in his ways, and that they in turn might, it says here, to be sent out to proclaim the message. Other versions put it more bluntly, to be sent out to preach the gospel. In other words, to go out and build church yourself. That takes us even further. Now, if you look at these 5 concentric circles, that is how Jesus built his church. That is the pattern for building this church, any church in the world. It is God's pattern that you work from the community, you reach to the community and bring people in. They form a crowd. They'll come to our harvest service, they'll come to some services, maybe not many, but they'll come to have a meal with us, they'll come to share with us, they'll come to hear music, and they'll come to be entertained. They'll become a crowd that is curious and wants to listen. But from that, Jesus wants to put the challenge, and we must put the challenge of the gospel in front so that they might become followers of him. But don't just stop there. Grow into maturity that will take them deeper. And through that, bring themselves to a place where, like the 12, they became ministers and served others. So like the fountain, the water's drawn up from the base, but it then spews out the top and waters the whole horizon thereafter. And so that is the pattern that Jesus laid for the development of his church, and it is a pattern that we will be exploring further over the next few weeks. And you can see that the move from community into the crowd involves us taking the gospel out to people. We call that mission. The move when people come in as a crowd and hear us, we give them testimony. We share the faith. We magnify the Lord Jesus here in church or wherever that meeting might be, and they're drawn in, and they want to be taken to the next stage of a congregation and become members of the congregation and of Christ in committing in faith. But those members need to go on and mature as true disciples. And true disciples will want to minister to others. So you've got my 5 M's, I hope. Let's go to the next slide and we might see them. Because the question falls, what are we doing? Are we church? Are we just playing at it? Is it a hobby? Or is it a lifetime's work? Are we the ark through which the people of this community can be saved and led to faith and led to eternal life? Or are we just passing by, ignoring the needs around us? And it all starts, the threshold starts with mission, reaching out. How do we do mission here? How are we doing? I've been with you for about 2.5, 3 years. I would say, probably like the GCSE results, could do better. We do have some wonderful opportunities to engage with people in this community. And the community for us here isn't just the city or town. It's not the town of Amesbury, as we know. It stretches out to Tidworth, Larkhill, and all the way south towards Salisbury. The nearest Baptist churches, I think, are Salisbury one way, Devizes the other, Andover the other, and I think it's Warminster the other. So we've got plenty of a harvest field to reach out into and draw people to the gospel. But are we doing it and bringing it into a genuine living faith? Or do we just entertain? It's a challenge, but we'll deal with that later. But then the next M, as we move up, is as we grow, we move from being in mission to magnify, to give testimony. And when we bring people here and when we bring people to our events, are we genuinely sharing the gospel and seeing them come to faith through our testimony? And then that reaches out and goes through to the next M, which is, of course, membership. Now, we don't just mean signing things in a dotted line. We mean the commitment of membership. And indeed, the membership meeting that we're doing on the 20th will explore this. And for the 6 people that we have asked us to become members, we're expecting a greater commitment. We're expecting them to sign a covenant of dedication to the Lord to say that that is what they will be expected to do in this church. We are looking to see that those who come to Christ genuinely want to follow him rather than just fritter around the edges. And then the next end that takes us forward is maturity. We're running house groups this week, as you know. We're running discipleship courses and have done and will continue to do so. We're running small groups. It is through small groups that you grow as a Christian believer. Don't think that Sunday is it. It is not. You'll get a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of attention and a little bit of thought. The way to do it is to grow in a small group, so get connected. And then that leads us on to become ministers together. That each one of us is being called to minister. It's very hard sometimes to convince people that actually, well, I just strum the guitar, I just play the flute, I just sit in the back. Each one of us is called by Jesus to be a minister, a servant with a role. And God has a role. God has what is it the old hymn said? God has a task that's only meant for you. There's a work for Jesus only you can do, as the old hymn says. And indeed, each one of us should discover that. And this church will be moving that direction to see how we discover it. So that's the plan for where we're going. Whether we reach it or not, who knows? But the key is this. Jesus said, I will build my church. Let me read the words that Jesus said in the version of the Message, which I think puts it very well. Jesus came to Peter and said, God bless you, Simon, son of Jonah. You didn't get that answer out of books or from teachers. My Father in heaven, God himself, let you in on the secret of who I really am. And now I'm going to tell you that who you are, really are. You are Peter, a rock. This is the rock on which I will put my church, a church so expansive with energy that not even the gates of hell will be able to keep it out. And that's not all. You will have complete and free access to God's kingdom, keys to open any and every door. No more barriers between heaven and earth and heaven. Yes on earth is yes in heaven, and no on earth is no in heaven. That mission of the gospel that we have to share, to work, to build, to grow, to be church. That is what we seek. And I trust you've taken this message to heart and will come and commit today and every day and ask yourself, so how could I open my house maybe to get a few people in? Maybe Barry or Roy or somebody else, or Ivor could come and take a house group once a week or once a month with it. No, don't do it once a week. It'll kill us. Once a month, perhaps, that I can invite neighbors and maybe we can informally share the gospel or have a Bible study and ask really awkward questions. Barry will answer them, don't worry. But think of ways that you can be the missionary in your community. We've been called to be that. Don't settle for less. Let's bow our heads.